Most people think they understand Eurovision, but Eurovision matters more than people admit it, is the glitter show. The strange costumes, the impossible key changes, the wind machines, the songs that sound like they were written by 5 aliens, 3 marketers, and 1 deeply emotional feeder kid. To many people, Eurovision looks like pure excess, a giant annual explosion of sequins, camp, chaos, and continental weirdness. And yes, it is all of those things, but that is not all it is. Because Eurovision is not just a music competition. It is one of the strangest mirrors modern Europe has ever built for itself. A stage where nations sing, perform, flirt, posture, confess, and mythologize themselves in front of the whole continent. A space where politics pretends to be absent while leaking through everything. A place where identity becomes melody, costume, choreography, accent, and spectacle. And that is why Eurovision matters more than people admit. Because underneath the glitter, Eurovision is about something much deeper. How modern societies try to turn themselves into stories people will love. On the surface, Eurovision has a very simple structure. Countries send a song. The song is performed. Points are awarded. Someone wins. Simple. But the emotional reality of Eurovision is much stranger than that. Because when a country sends a song to Eurovision, it is not just sending a song. It is sending an image of itself. Not necessarily a truthful image, often not even a realistic image, but an image nonetheless, a fantasy of national personality. One country sends sincerity, another sends irony, another sends raw power, another sends folk symbolism wrapped in LED screens and 21st century production. In that sense, Eurovision is not just about music. It is about performance at the level of civilization. Every nation asks the same hidden question. How do we want to be seen? That is an enormous question. Because human beings do not just perform as individuals. Groups perform too. Nations perform. Cultures perform. Entire regions perform. And Eurovision is one of the few places where that performance becomes visible in such a concentrated way. It is Europe turning itself into theater. Europe is a strange idea. Not just a place, but an argument. A continent full of old wounds, ancient languages, border anxieties, empire memories, cultural pride, regional insecurity, and competing definitions of what civilization is supposed to mean. And yet, once a year, all of that complexity gets compressed into one surreal event where countries stand side by side and say, in effect, this is our song, this is our mood, this is our fantasy, please vote for us. That is funny, but it is also profound, because Eurovision takes something that could have been military, territorial, or ideological competition and turns it into aesthetic competition. Instead of invading each other, countries send dance breaks. Instead of cannon fire, they send high notes. Instead of flags on battlefields, they send them into arenas full of lights and camera cranes. That sounds silly until you realize how extraordinary it is. Eurovision transforms rivalry into ritual. It says, you may still want to defeat one another, but for tonight, you must do it through melody. And that is one of the reasons the contest feels so emotionally charged. Because beneath the sparkle, there is something very old happening. Tribes gathering in symbolic competition. Only this time, the weapons are choruses. People often laugh at Eurovision because it is excessive, but excess is not a flaw in Eurovision. Excess is the language. Eurovision is one of the few modern institutions that still understands a truth most of contemporary culture has forgotten. People do not just want efficiency, they want drama. They want the oversized emotion, the sense that something absurdly important is happening, even if it is just a song contest. They want to feel that style itself still matters. Modern life is full of gray systems, algorithms, spreadsheets, commuter trains, emails, invisible economic structures, polite exhaustion. Eurovision offers the opposite. It is theatrical overload as spiritual relief. For a few hours, normal realism is suspended, and in that suspension, people are allowed to feel things at full volume. This is why Eurovision is so beloved by people who are tired of living in emotionally muted environments. It is not merely entertaining, it is liberating. It gives permission for feeling, for artifice, for flamboyance, for melodrama, for symbolic self-invention. And maybe that is why it is often misunderstood by people who approach it with detached irony. Because Eurovision is not asking to be cool, it is asking to be felt. One of the most fascinating things about Eurovision is that it constantly oscillates between two emotional poles, camp and sincerity. Sometimes a performance feels outrageous, self-aware, theatrical, almost parodic. Other times it feels painfully earnest, vulnerable, and emotionally naked. And somehow, both belong. That is part of Eurovision's magic. It understands that modern identity is unstable. We are all switching between irony and sincerity, performance and confession, spectacle and truth. One moment a country arrives in silver armor with techno-folklore and choreography that looks like a prophecy from another dimension. The next moment someone stands almost still and sings a song so direct and human, it cuts through everything. That emotional range is not random. It reflects something real about modern life. People are exhausted by performance, but they are also addicted to it. They long for authenticity, but often only know how to express themselves through heightened images. They want truth, but truth is often easier to approach through costume, stage, symbol, and song than through ordinary speech. Eurovision captures that paradox perfectly. It is fake and real at the same time, artificial and deeply human, ridiculous and somehow moving. That combination is rare, and it is very European. Of course, no essay on Eurovision would be complete without talking about voting. Because Eurovision is never just about music. It is about taste, yes, but also memory, geography, affinity, diaspora, politics, sympathy, aesthetics, and the emotional afterlife of history. People often complain about this, as if the contest would be purer if only everyone voted with cold, artistic objectivity. But that complaint misses the point. Eurovision is interesting precisely because art is never received in a vacuum. No one encounters a song as a neutral machine. People hear songs through identity, through language, through belonging, through history, through emotional associations they may not even understand. When countries vote, they are not simply ranking melodies. They are revealing invisible relationships. Who feels close to whom? Who recognizes whom? Who wants to reward whom? Who sees themselves in whom? In that sense, the scoreboard is not just a result. It is a map of emotional Europe. Messy, biased, unpredictable, occasionally unfair, but also revealing. Because fairness was never the only thing happening here. Eurovision is not a laboratory. It is a civilization performing its affections, resentments, and fantasies in public. A Eurovision performance is never just a song. It is a compressed worldview. 3 minutes to create a universe. 3 minutes to suggest identity, atmosphere, emotional stakes, symbolic texture, and enough memorability to survive the flood of everything else. That is difficult. But it is also philosophically interesting, because Eurovision stages a modern version of an ancient human struggle. How do you become unforgettable in a world overflowing with images? This is not just a problem for singers. It is the problem of modern life itself. Every person, every brand, every movement, every nation is fighting the same war, attention. And Eurovision magnifies that struggle into art. To succeed, a performance must do more than sound good. It must cut through. It must become an event in the mind. That is why Eurovision entries are often so visually loaded. The staging is not decoration, it is existential strategy. The performer is trying to burn an identity into collective memory before the next act arrives and replaces it. This is what makes the contest feel so modern. It is not only about beauty, it is about surviving the flood. If Eurovision were just silly fun, people would not care this much. But they do care. They care intensely. They cry. They rage, they celebrate, they argue, they feel vindicated when a song they loved gets recognized, and wounded when a favorite is ignored. Why? Because by the time the points are being announced, the songs are no longer just songs. They have become emotional carriers. A person hears themselves in one performance, their country in another, their longing in another, their politics, their identity, their taste, their idea of what beauty should sound like. So when the voting happens, it does not feel like a neutral result. It feels like a judgment, not only of music, but of values. That is why Eurovision is so psychologically rich. It reveals that aesthetic taste is never just aesthetic. It is tied to how people imagine dignity, passion, modernity, tradition, strength, vulnerability, even what kind of world they want to live in. Eurovision turns those hidden desires into public ceremony. There is another reason Eurovision matters, and it may be the deepest one. It stages a form of unity that does not require sameness. That is rare. Most political visions of unity eventually become pressure toward conformity. Speak like this, believe this, represent yourself in this approved way. But Eurovision, at its best, says something different. You may arrive in your own language, in your own style, with your own wounds, sounds, symbols, absurdities, and emotional codes, and still, you belong in the room. That is not a small thing. In a fragmented world, a ritual that allows difference to appear without demanding total erasure is valuable. Of course, Eurovision is imperfect. Of course, it is commercial. Of course, it is political in ways it cannot fully admit. But despite all of that, it still carries a strange utopian impulse, the hope that wildly different people can gather in one symbolic space and answer one another not with silence, but with song. That idea is fragile, a little naive maybe, but also beautiful. And in a cynical age, beauty tied to naivety can be a form of courage. There is also something else happening here that people rarely say aloud. Eurovision satisfies a need that modern secular life often leaves starving: ritualized spectacle. Human beings have always gathered around symbolic events larger than themselves: religious festivals, seasonal rites, royal ceremonies, public dramas, communal performances of identity and belonging. Modern life, for all its technology, often struggles to create rituals with that kind of emotional force. Eurovision does. It is one of the few annual events that still feels ceremonial. It has anticipation, repetition, memory, shared codes, mythology, a sense of return. People do not just watch Eurovision, they prepare for it. They argue about it before it happens. They ritualize it afterward. That means Eurovision is doing more than filling airtime. It is functioning as a secular festival, a recurring cultural ceremony through which people process identity, belonging, and collective feeling. And perhaps that is why it endures, because beneath all the camp and competition, it is meeting a very old human need to gather around a stage and feel part of something larger, stranger, louder, and more symbolic than ordinary life. So what does Eurovision really reveal? That nations want to be loved, that identity is always part invention, that spectacle can carry truth, that politics never fully leaves the room, that art and competition make uneasy but fascinating partners, that people are hungrier for ceremony than they admit, that even in an age of cynicism, millions still want to believe that 3 minutes on a stage can mean something. And maybe that is the real secret of Eurovision. It is not just entertainment. It is a continent dreaming out loud, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes beautifully, sometimes with complete ridiculousness, but dreaming nonetheless. Dreaming of being admired, understood, remembered, voted for, welcomed, celebrated. In the end, Eurovision is not really about who has the best song. It is about who can most powerfully turn sound into belonging, who can make a performance feel like a people, who can make a chorus feel like an identity, who can stand in front of millions and say, "This is us," or at least, "This is how we wish to be seen." And maybe that is why people keep coming back, not just for the chaos, not just for the memes, not just for the sequins and spectacle, but because Eurovision stages something modern life rarely offers so openly: the chance to watch whole cultures try, for 3 unforgettable minutes, to sing themselves into meaning.